There are two people living on the same street. One drives a brand new Mercedes, designer clothes, expensive restaurants. Every holiday somehow ends up somewhere you've seen on Instagram. The other drives a 6-year-old Toyota, dresses normally, lives in a nice house, but nothing about him makes you stop and think, that guy must be rich. If I asked you which one was wealthier, most people would point to the Mercedes. And they could be completely wrong. Because everything we use to judge someone's wealth, the car, the watch, the house, the holidays, tells us how much money they spent. It tells us almost nothing about how much money they actually have. And that confusion is one of the most expensive financial mistakes people make. The harder you try to look wealthy, the harder it can become to actually become wealthy. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why real wealth is so difficult to see, and the simple shift that completely changes the way you think about money. So let's give them names. Daniel earns $180,000 a year. He drives the Mercedes, lives in a beautiful apartment, takes luxury holidays, and always seems like he's doing well. Michael earns $110,000, drives a Toyota, stays in a comfortable house, rarely buys anything that turns heads. From the outside, everything tells you Daniel is winning. The income is higher, the lifestyle is more impressive, and the image is exactly what success is supposed to look like. But there's something about Daniel's life that nobody on his street can actually see. So let's open his bank account. Daniel's $180,000 sounds enormous until you follow the money. The mortgage, the Mercedes payment, credit cards carrying a balance, restaurants a few nights a week, flights and hotels for those holidays, the new phone every year, the wardrobe that needs to stay current, the subscriptions that quietly pile up. His income is high, but so is the floor. The minimum amount of money Daniel needs every single month just to keep his life running is enormous. And here's the thing most people miss. We saw what Daniel bought, but we never stopped to think about what those things cost him to keep. The Mercedes isn't a one-time decision. It's a monthly commitment sitting on top of every other monthly commitment. And together, those commitments quietly determine how much of Daniel's income is actually his to keep. Now follow Michael. Michael isn't secretly living like a monk. He travels, he eats out, he has a comfortable home, and he genuinely enjoys his life. The difference is what happens after his lifestyle is paid for. Some money disappears into consumption. That's fine, that's life. But some of it goes somewhere else. Stocks, business equity, retirement investments, a modest rental property he picked up a few years ago. And here's where the thinking shifts. Daniel uses most of his money to upgrade how his life looks. Michael increasingly uses his money to buy pieces of his future. One man is spending, the other is accumulating ownership. And over time, those two choices begin taking them in completely different directions. Think of it like two people filling buckets. Daniel has the bigger bucket, but there are holes in the bottom. All those fixed obligations constantly draining it. Michael's bucket is smaller, but more of what goes into it stays there. And some of what stays there begins producing more on its own. That's the difference. Daniel owns plenty of expensive things, but many of them require more money from him every month. Michael is gradually building ownership in things that can grow in value or produce income. Those are two completely different financial trajectories, even if the gap between their salaries doesn't look dramatic on paper. Now, why did we instinctively choose Daniel at the beginning? That's worth understanding. Because this is the trap. We can see the Mercedes, we can see the Rolex, we can see the house and the business class seat. What we can't see is an investment account. We can't see equity. We can't see a cash reserve, a nearly paid-off mortgage, or a portfolio quietly growing in the background. And because we judge success using the things we can actually see, we start confusing the display of wealth with wealth itself. We're reading signals, and expensive things are very powerful signals. But they're signals of spending, not necessarily ownership. Spending is visible. Wealth usually isn't. Now watch what happens when time enters the picture. 5 years pass. Both men's careers improve. Daniel now makes substantially more money. Michael earns more too. You might expect the gap between them to close, or at least stay roughly the same. Instead, Daniel upgrades. The Mercedes becomes a Porsche. The nice apartment becomes a bigger house with a bigger mortgage. The good holidays become luxury holidays. And every raise gets absorbed into a more expensive lifestyle before it has much chance to become anything else. Daniel earns more, but now he needs more. That's the strange thing about lifestyle inflation. Your salary can keep rising while the amount of freedom that salary gives you barely changes. Michael improves his life too, but much more slowly. His lifestyle gets better, but his ownership grows faster. And quietly, without anyone on the street noticing, the two men's financial positions start moving further and further apart. Which brings us to the question that changes everything. What happens if their income suddenly stops? One morning, both men get a phone call. Their company is restructuring. Unexpectedly, both of them lose their jobs on the same day. Daniel's impressive lifestyle is now a machine that requires money every single month. Mortgage, car payment, credit cards, bills. All the things that looked like evidence of success when his salary was coming in suddenly look very different when it stops. And this is where the real cost of all those upgrades finally appears. Not when Daniel bought them, but when his income disappears and they keep demanding to be paid for. Daniel has a high income, but without that income, the entire structure becomes difficult to maintain. Michael loses his salary too, but his life doesn't immediately collapse. Because over the previous decade, he wasn't only earning money. He was buying freedom from needing the next paycheck. His investments can produce income. His obligations are manageable. His financial runway is much longer. Daniel needs another large paycheck soon. Michael has options. And that difference, the ability to pause, to think, to make a decision from a position of stability instead of desperation, isn't something you can put on Instagram. But it might be the most valuable thing either of these men could have built. And now we can finally flip the scoreboard. Daniel earned more money over the decade. He might still have the nicer car. From the street, he probably still looks like the more successful one. But Michael owns substantially more productive assets and carries far fewer obligations. For 10 years, Daniel converted most of his rising income into a rising lifestyle. Michael converted more of his into ownership. And now we can finally draw the distinction. Daniel became rich. Michael became wealthy. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. Daniel's lifestyle depends heavily on his next paycheck. Michael is slowly reaching the point where his money can support more and more of his lifestyle without him having to earn every dollar again. One of them looks wealthy. The other is becoming financially independent. But before we finish, there's one final shift that matters more than almost everything else we've talked about. Most people ask, "Can I afford this?" Daniel could afford the Mercedes payment. He could afford the bigger house. He could afford the holidays. But affordability was never really the issue. Because "can I afford this?" only asks about right now. It says nothing about what that purchase does to your future. Some purchases are genuinely one-time expenses. Others quietly raise the minimum amount of money your life requires every month. So there's a better question. And it's the question Michael has effectively been asking all along. Does this purchase increase my freedom? Or does it increase how much money I need next month? That's the shift. And it doesn't mean never enjoying anything. Nobody needs to turn every dinner into an investment calculation. Life is supposed to be enjoyed. The danger is usually much quieter than one enormous financial mistake. It's the micro upgrades. Stack enough of them together and you've created a private tax on your future. That's lifestyle creep in its quietest and most expensive form. It doesn't announce itself. It simply raises the minimum cost of your life until a salary that once felt enormous suddenly feels like it barely covers everything. Not every expense needs to make money. But repeatedly choosing appearance over ownership has a hidden cost. And that cost is measured in freedom. Because the real cost isn't only the money you spend today, it's also what that money could have become over the years ahead. That's the calculation Daniel never made. So maybe the question isn't, how rich do I look? Maybe it's, how much of my life do I actually own? If that question landed for you, subscribe to the Fortune Files. Because behind every fortune are decisions like these. Decisions that often look completely ordinary until years later. This is only one chapter of a much bigger journey.